Good afternoon, First Presbyterian Church family. This is Wednesday, February 10th, and I hope this finds you well. Even though we associate the song with the Christmas season, the term "baby, it's cold outside" does come to mind. It is a cold day. Weather's going to be iffy for the next several days. Probably we will have worship on the 14th, but I and the clerk of session, we will be watching weather advisories and we'll keep you posted. This Sunday will be Valentine's Day, and it's the time for the love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13. I want to share some of the thoughts I shared in the newsletter, a way this chapter was applied, and then just share a song about it that reflects the truth of this chapter. 1 Corinthians 13 is part of that first letter to the church at Corinth. Hence it's called 1 Corinthians. Paul had an interesting relationship with the church. Let's step back a little bit. It was a church that had a lot of problems. He wrote a letter. He wrote this letter. It was not received well. He wrote another letter, and that has been lost to us. And in some of the discussion, I think there may have been another letter in there. But basically, the follow-up to that sorrowful letter that is lost, the follow-up to that one is what we call 2 Corinthians. So there's some correspondence to he references here that we do not have. We just have those two letters. But this 1 Corinthians was written in response to the many issues that they had at the church. Midst of great divisions. Again, some of you may have even heard this shared before. Some preferred Paul, some preferred Peter, some preferred Apollos, this very eloquent preacher that was there, and just some, well, I belong to Christ. Was just seen as a fourth party. So at least 4 groups in the church. Maybe you have been actually in a time of dissension in a church and there seem to be 2 camps. Imagine being in a church with 4 camps and maybe shifting alliances between them. There was sexual immorality going on in the congregation. There was worship wars. I use that an early form of that, of what was the appropriate things to do at worship and how that should be done. It was very chaotic. Also, the sense of what are the gifts of the Spirit and what's their purpose. People lording it over one another, so you've got that going on. Another issue they had was with communion. They would do things differently. I think of today what we might have a Sunday, have a communion Sunday, and after church you might have a lunch after church or a supper. We would do it that way. They would do it different. They would actually have the meal and then would wrap up with worship and communion. Again, reversed it. This would be in the evening, and those who were free, who had their own places, businesses, whatever, they could come, they could eat, and then worship without a problem. The slaves in that society, I mean, they had some freedom of movement. They had to show up after all their work was done. Think of this as a difference of somebody who is a salaried employee versus an hourly employee. Slaves could not show up until afterwards, and often the food was already eaten. No plates were left with the covering saying, okay, here, yeah, we set such a side of a plate. None of that was being done. Again, very troubled place. And so when he's writing 1 Corinthians 13, it's not one of those, y'all got this thing down pat. It's, hey, folks, y'all need to know what's going on. This is what love is. It's not the great, giving alms, offerings, all of that is good. But if there's no love, it's worthless. These great gifts are meant for a purpose, to build the body. And that's, again, one of Paul's big themes is all the gifts we are given are meant to build the body, not to exalt ourselves. So he's talking about some actions in which it falls. Now, and I shared this in the newsletter. Doing a little bit of study, it said there are 2 categories, what love is and what it is not. And both lists include actions. First, there's the isn't. It is not jealous. It does not brag. It is not arrogant. Does not act unbecomingly. Does not seek its own. Does not take into account wrong suffered. Does not rejoice in unrighteousness. Hearing a podcast today, an individual going over some of these items from that list, it talked about how one could be arrogant, taking one's own agenda over that of somebody else. Again, I think of that salaried person, that person owned his own business, that woman of means, of independent means, being able to go there and just go ahead and eat, and having no regard for the hourly person, the slave that had to show up later and may not have anything. How we treat, again, people today, think of that. The sevens of what it is more proactive. It is patient. It is kind. It rejoices with the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Where it continues in chapter 13, is like gifts will pass. In fact, some believe that some of those gifts that were there in the first century church were only there for the front end of the faith. And they had a lifespan, and they were meant for a purpose. There was nothing wrong with them. It's just this was their lifespan, and it passed. But the point is, again, the gifts, they pass, they go, but are meant to be used to serve others. Faith, hope, and love. That's what matters. And the greatest of these is love. Now, Jesus is the only one who loves perfectly. This list is not meant to be a burden for anyone. It's to call us, to inspire us to pursue Christ in his perfect way. And also, as I shared in the newsletter, how we could use that as a prayer for others. Lord, may my love be patient. Lord, may my spouse, sibling, parent, child, friend, love in a way that believes all things. Lord, may an elected official not be arrogant or seek his own. May that person rejoice in the truth. Now, that's a great prayer to give to any of our elected officials. May that person not be arrogant or seek his or her own. Again, we could go through this and pray this. Years ago, came across a book, and I have referenced it, I believe, on these messages. I've referenced it in sermons, and you'll hear it again. It's called Faith is Not a Feeling by Nay Bailey, who is still on staff with Campus Crusade for Christ, now called Cru. I understand she lives in the North Dallas area now, but for many years lived in Southern California, and then have lived in other places. I'd actually lived in Dallas back in the late 60s. But she shares in her book, Faith is Not a Feeling, one of the chapters is about her relationship with her father. And she grew up in Louisiana, I want to say in Shreveport. She grew up in North Louisiana, and she had a troubled relationship with her father. There was not abuse, she shares it. It was personalities. Probably personalities just didn't automatically jibe. She was the first one. He was wrapping up law school and trying to get established in his law practice, and did not spend as much time with her. She's a person whose love language is time. Spend time with me. Let's have conversation. Social studies was always her strong suit. That means I am loved. And his when he would share was auctioned through gifts, which is nice, but was not her primary love language. I'm going to get ahead of myself, but she later learned more of his story. She understood why he expressed like he did. When he got angry, he just kind of went off. Now, I think it was more case that he went off and then he calmed down, and it's like, okay, I'm not angry anymore. Not really realizing that, yeah, but some folks are still kind of shaken from that blow up. It wasn't just a little something to others. The way they took it more seriously. As a child, it was hard to realize that his bark was much worse than his bite. She just heard the bark. And so it was a troubled, subtly troubled relationship. Was more emotionally distant. Again, there wasn't the great battles that we often think in troubled relationships. It was basically, I'll go my way and you go yours. So that's the background. But the Lord began to soften her heart towards her father. And going through these verses, She actually first was studying it, saying this is the perfect definition of love. She was going, well, God's love to me is patient. God's love to me is kind, and God's love to me is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. God's love to me bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And first I thought, wow, the love of God to me is like that. But if it's to me, it's to the others out there. And of course that called how I am to love others. And realizing that God's love for her father was just the same thing. And Lord, can my love to my father be patient? She said one day she was visiting on her periodic visits back home, saw him napping, and she said, I love you just the way you are. She said what's interesting about this, an extended period of time she was spending with them, that as she began to kind of have this accepting attitude, how it seemed to change with him. And over the years, through gestures, began to heal that relationship. She talked about they went on a fishing trip, and he caught a very small fish, but took a very proud picture, and she just said he had a big Jackie Gleason, Lou Costello kind of face. And so he was very, kind of like, I'm so proud of my big fish. And it was kind of like this kind of fish. And so she had it enlarged, framed it, had it sent to his law office. He was so pleased with it, he had to take it over to the courthouse and show all of his law buddies, look what my daughter gave me. She began to pursue that relationship, and he responded, and she said in some respects, a lot of his personality was just the same as before. But as she began to understand more of his own story, that he himself was a child of divorce, that his father was a wildcatter who made and lost fortunes right and left, and when the money was flowing, would kind of swoop in and give him gifts, and then swoop out again. Hence, that's how he learned, that's how you show love. As she began to understand those things in his story, she began to appreciate him and build that relationship. I go back to that chapter periodically as I explore my relationships with different people, and that reminder to me that God's love to me is patient and kind and believes all things. Through the power of the Holy Spirit, I can love others that way. As we look to Valentine's Day, and with the weather it's going to be this weekend, you may end up celebrating it later in February, or you may even do a combination St. Patrick's Day, Valentine's Day celebration. As you're looking to that, just keep those words in mind. And I want to share this hymn. We've sung it before by Hal Hobson, Though I May Speak. Though I may speak with bravest fire, and have the gift to all inspire, and have not love, my words are vain as sounding brass and hopeless gain. Though I may give all I possess, and striving so my love profess, but not be given by love within, the prophet soon turns strangely thin. Come, Spirit, come, our hearts control, our spirits long to be made whole. Let inward love guide every deed, by this we worship and are freed. May this be our hymn for today, and our anthem for today, and our prayer for today. Have a good week.